an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Novice by Trudy Canavan. Chapters 32, 33, and 34, brought to you by Ashley. In these chapters, so it turns out that my original suspicions about Daniel were correct also. I'm feeling a little smug about that. And Dorian comes up with an actually pretty solid idea for Sonea to handle Regin. It has so much potential to go terribly, terribly wrong, but I really want her to do it, and I'm curious what's going to happen on that. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha, and I am really excited because this is like one of the last sections that I'm going to be covering for this book before I get into the final book. And I really don't know where we're headed with a lot of this. There are some things that I've been able to predict a little bit, but a lot of it I haven't. And I'm taken aback a bit by how solid and familiar parts of the story seem while still managing to pull curveballs out of its pockets. So yeah, this section begins, chapter 32 begins with Rothan, and he tells Tanya that he has cut down to 1/10 of the dosage of the drug that he's been taking to help him sleep. I don't know if that's true. He says that to her, but he also said the other day that he was going to stop taking it he said it to himself. He wasn't promising anyone else. And then he goes and does. So, I don't know if he's telling her what he thinks she needs to hear, or if he's done that, quote, off screen, off page. But I am a little bit concerned about him and what that's going to do to him if it turns out that he has started lying to people about how much he's taking, because that's always a really big warning sign when with addiction, is that you start to lie to people because you think, oh, well, I just need to get them off my back. I can handle how much I'm having, but they get really judgy about it, so I'm not going to be honest with them. When in fact the case is often that you can't handle how much you're having, and they know better than you because they watch it happen and they know what you're like, and you are the one in denial about how things are affecting you. Most of the time, as much as we hate to admit this, people who are on the outside of a situation have a clearer viewpoint on what's really happening. And that is not to say outside of a situation like commenters on the internet have a better idea. But I mean like friends who are not necessarily involved directly in whatever's going on. And that's not always the case, but often it is, because we always try and tell ourselves that our situation is different from all of the other similar situations, and that everybody's reacting to it because usually with other people, that is what it's like. But with me, it's not like that. And we'll do that in all kinds of different scenarios. We'll do it when we're talking about our finances, when we're talking about the way that we're like eating or treating ourselves, when we're talking about bad relationships, and when it's about drugs. And I'm concerned. So Rothan, get it together, guy. Please have somebody like dose out for you instead of doing it for yourself, if that's what you need. But you definitely need some help, and I would appreciate it if you would like be a little bit more straightforward with everybody about what's really happening here. So when he's talking to Tanya, he's asking, basically, he wants the tea. He's asking her to tell him what the gossip is in the servants' quarters, because they all know each other, but are not necessarily going to tell the truth about what they know in front of one another if they are working for, if the person they're talking to is working for somebody with a vested interest and they're concerned that it's going to like get back to their superior that they've been snitching, or, you know, like there's the one that started working, Viola is the one that started working for Sonea, and Viola is sort of afraid to talk. I don't even know about afraid. Maybe it is partially afraid. But she's just trying to maintain her position working for the High Lord, and telling tales out of school, as the idiom goes, is not the best way to maintain your position. And she says the university cleaners were complaining this morning that some foul-smelling liquid was splattered all over one of the passages. I asked them what they thought had happened, and they started grumbling about novices fighting each other. They were a bit reluctant to say which novices, so I bribed it out of one of the serving girls who had already heard the story. Regin has been gathering together other novices and waylaying Sonea at night. I asked Viola about it, and she said she hadn't seen anything to suggest that Sonea had been harmed at all. And he's, like, obviously Rothan is just really irritated with this whole situation. He is thinking about how Regin could, like, wear Sonea down, and basically nothing she could do to defend herself would be effective anymore. Even, like, physically she wouldn't be able to. Tanya drew in a sharp breath. He wouldn't dare hurt her, would he? Not in any way that would do lasting damage or have him expelled. Rothan scowled at the table. Now, I want to know if Rothan really believes that. Because here's the thing, is that Rothan is a person who wants to believe the best of people. I'm going to put this in modern terms. So there are a lot of folks out there. I'm going to get a little bit political and a little bit inflammatory for a second. There are a lot of people out there who want to defend police. And the police there are so many studies showing that people of color are targeted by police. And when something happens to a person of color at the hands of police, nobody cares. And nothing ever happens to the officer who committed said crime. I'm just going to call it a crime. And Rothan is a really well-intentioned liberal who wants to believe that all of this stuff is really just due to misunderstandings, heat of the moment. It's not really like it's not something that people are okay with, but it's an unfortunate thing that you know, there's probably racism in there somewhere, but it's probably not the like motivating factor. And he believes that if there were truly enough evidence that a cop was out of line, that cop would definitely be punished in some way. But if they aren't, it means that the evidence isn't there. Rothan is that kind of guy. He still has faith in the system, and he still wants to have faith in people. And what he doesn't seem to understand, and I'm saying this as somebody who firmly believes the opposite, which is that this is all done intentionally. This is all done with the knowledge that nobody is going to care. This is all done with the understanding that the system works this way and always has, and shields and supports people who do this sort of thing. Rothan believes that if Regin were to go too far and really hurt her, that Regin would be expelled. I don't believe that for a second. I believe that it would be a scandal and Regin would have a huge uphill battle afterward, but that the majority of people here would support him and secretly be relieved that the outsider, the dwell, the poor amongst all of the nobles who did not deserve to be there in the first place, they would be secretly glad that she was gone and order had been restored. So Rothan wants to think that all of his peers would support what's right, but he does not seem to grasp the depth of this system and what it does to people. and how prejudiced everyone really is. The fact that Regin has the number of supporters that he does among the student body really tells you all you need to know. And the fact that there's no way that they've been able to hide everything from all of the other teachers, and that those teachers are clearly turning a blind eye. This is not a situation that the system is built to work with, because the system was created by people in power who want to keep people like Sonea in their place. So Rothan's faith that Regin would not do something that would do lasting damage, or something that would get him expelled. Technically, in a way, he's right, because he's like, well, he wouldn't do anything that would get him expelled. No, he probably wouldn't. And I'm pretty sure he knows, killing her would not get him expelled. I think he is banking on the fact. So I'm really into, this whole development that winds up coming up later with how Sonea is going to defend herself. And I'm going to be really curious what the reaction of teachers will be once this becomes common knowledge, and how Rothan is going to see it. Because I just can't... I need Rothan to have his eyes opened. We had the whole first book with him sort of defending Fergan and not believing the worst of Fergan, despite the fact that Daniel was trying to tell him. And later on we get in this section that it turns out that Daniel is gay. And at the time, when Daniel was still in denial, and Rothan still doesn't know, all Rothan heard was that, Fergan made up some stories. But even if it were just making up stories, don't get me wrong, that's still bad enough. But now it turns out Daniel is actually gay. Sonea is a Dwell. Fergan is targeting minorities. He's targeting oppressed people. And Rothan wouldn't see it. He just wouldn't look at that. He wouldn't be honest with himself or anybody else about what Fergan is like. And that is such a symptom of a person who wants to believe the best of people. I have been this person. And it's so difficult to finally admit to yourself that there are just bad people in the world. And not cartoon bad, but this kind of low-key, stunted, prejudiced kind of bad, where they just want to keep things the way they've always been, which seems weirdly benign, but until you look at the way things have always been and really start to examine what that means. So I really I need Fergan to get with I need Rothan to get with the program. Martin's asking me, do you think Fergan actually knew he was gay, or just a random insult which turned out to be true? I won't say that he knew he was gay, but I'm going to guess that he had a sense of it, because I had the sense of it just reading about Daniel. I was like, there's something about the way that he interacts with the world where he never has a sexual thought or an attraction to anybody. Rothan doesn't in the present, but we know his history of him and his wife, and that he used to love her and used to be in a relationship. And there was something so sexless about Daniel that it attracted my attention. And I know that that's a result of Fergan targeting him, and so him shutting everything off. But I just felt like there has to be before Fergan actually accused him, he probably was already aware of his urges and his attractions and was already trying to shut that down. And Fergan, maybe that attracted his attention. So yeah, I'm going to say, I don't want to say Fergan knew, because that really kind of implies that Fergan has more understanding of Daniel than Daniel has of himself. But more that Fergan's attention was simply drawn to the fact that Daniel didn't seem to have any sexuality, and that was an easy direction to turn all of that. So yeah, I'm just Rothan, I really like him. He's well-intentioned. He's one of those people that you get so frustrated with when you're a person like me who has started to really accept bad people exist. They aren't misunderstood. They're not just uneducated, ignorant people. They're genuinely toxic, bad people. And there are times where there's nothing you can do, and no amount of cajoling and convincing conversation and persuasion or presentation of facts is going to sway them. But if you reach that point, like I finally have, and you're still friends with people who want to think the best of others, you don't really know how to, you just have to sort of wait for them to figure it out is all you can do. And I'm watching that happen with a couple of my friends who have had a lot of faith in people and are slowly starting to be like, wow, maybe these folks are just terrible. And it's not like I'm cheering and fist pumping and feeling smug about the fact that they're finally getting it. It's sad. It's hard to watch because I don't want to believe that. As much as I have started to, and I feel like I'm coming to terms with it, it's not a nice thing to know. It's not a good feeling. So I don't blame people for resisting that. But there does come a time where the denial is hurting other people around you. And if Rothan took this more seriously and admitted to himself that maybe Regin could really hurt Sonea and totally get away with it, he might be more alarmed. And I don't know what he could actually do to defend her, but I feel like there has to be something. I don't know. It's just... So I wanted to talk about that here because he's really sort of hitting a lot of those notes for me. So Rothan, he has a letter from Sonea's aunt and uncle, and Tanya offers to take it to her and is like, oh, yeah, that would be great, because he was trying to think of how he could get it to her without Acheron getting upset because he's not supposed to go and talk to her. If you deliver it to her room, she won't get it until tonight. I think she spends free days in the Novice's library. So she brings it to the library. That way, Acheron won't necessarily see that she's getting it. We find out later that Acheron is quite aware of everything that's going on with Sonea. I feel like Acheron spends his whole day following her around and spying on her, which is the creepiest. But we'll see. So now that we have already talked around what's going on with Daniel, let's go to what actually happens with Daniel. So he is at the ruins with Tyand. Trying to find the spot. Oh, here it is. So first of all, it never occurred to me, the concept of healing with magic is sort of, it has a lot more implications than I think I ever really appreciated. So the fact that Daniel can heal himself as he's hiking, and that way his legs don't get tired and he doesn't breathe hard, that is insane to me. And I had been sort of low-key wondering why the fuck healing would be the thing that Sonea was attracted to. Not really, because after what she saw, it makes sense she doesn't want to be a warrior. But I was only thinking of it in terms of being a doctor. And for me, that's so boring. They're helping people is great, but just that's not my bag. That's not the kind of help that I'm super interested in. I appreciate that it needs to exist, and that, thank God, there are people out there who are willing to do that stuff. But not my bag. But basically what we're finding out is that if you can heal yourself, that allows you to push yourself physically so far that you could kind of be like a superhero. I mean, obviously, if you've got magic, you're already a superhero. But this is a much more there's a lot more physicality here. And I find that to be very interesting and just opens up a wide vista of possibilities. So when Tyand realizes that Daniel has been healing himself, he finally agrees to let Daniel heal him so that they can be on the same page. This is amazing, he exclaimed. I feel like I did this morning before we left. Come on, then. We haven't got all day. So they get to the top, and there are some glyphs that Tyand needs to work on translating. There is a stone bench that has holes cut into it at regular intervals. And Tyen is suggesting that maybe it's like a washroom, that these are sinks. Daniel thinks that maybe it's a kitchen and that the holes were meant to like hold pots over flames. I don't think we ever get a specific answer on that section and what that did. But I am very curious about it because I feel like, and this is a wild bit of conjecture here, so please bear with me. This is a place we find out later where magicians were brought to be executed. Are those bowls meant to like catch blood? Were there executions like that there? Like, were there ritual like I sacrifices basically? I don't know. But I feel like whatever those bowl like holes were, there is something more sinister to it than the benign sort of like householdy stuff that they are theorizing. Okay, so Tyen stopped before another carved wall. He was pointing at a section high up where some of the stone had fallen away. Demladieri didn't mention anything about Acheron coming up here. Perhaps he forgot. Perhaps Acheron didn't tell him. But he really wanted us to come here. What does the ancient writing say? According to this is a door. Yes, Tyen tapped the wall, and it leads to a place of judgment. I wonder if it can still be opened. So Daniel just opens this door and says that he's going to head in and make sure that it's safe because he thinks that if there is any cave-in or anything like that, his magic will protect him. And Tyen is going to stay behind and finish translating. I'll come back as soon as I know it's safe. You'd better. As Daniel slipped through the door, he willed a globe light into existence and sent it ahead. The walls were unadorned. At first, he had to brush aside fine cascades of roots and farren webs, but after about 20 steps, the way was clear. The floor sloped downward slightly, and the air grew rapidly colder. So he goes down these side passages, or this one passage. There are no side passages. And he gets to this ledge that is comprised of a big circular platform. And he's in a sort of like cavern. So he brightens the globe light that he's brought in order to make it clearer what's in the rest of the room. And there is this dome that's glittering and sparkling in front of him. And he thinks like it's described as like as if it were covered by innumerable gemstones. Daniel flexed his will, creating small globe lights along the length of it. Something shifted in the corner of his eye. He turned to see that a section of the dome was glittering brighter than the rest. Rivulets of light appeared, shivering toward each other. Staring in fascination, he watched as they raced to meet. It looked like the arena barrier when it had been struck, except in reverse. Some instinct warned him, and he threw up a shield just in time to meet the streak of power from the dome. He exclaimed in surprise at the strength of it, then again in shock as he felt another attack from behind. Turning, he saw a second starburst of power in the stones and two more rapidly forming. He took a step toward the passage entrance, then another, and felt the sting of a barrier blocking his way. What is going on? Who is doing this? So finally, he puts all like as much of a shield up as he can. And I think here it is. If he squeezed himself up against the barrier, the strikes might miss him when his shield failed. And if he let his shield drop and put all his power into breaking the barrier, it might fall before the next strike hit. It was all he could think of. He had no time to come up with a better idea. Closing his eyes, he ignored the sting of magic as he pushed up against the barrier. He drew in a breath and simultaneously dropped his shield and blasted out all his power. He felt the barrier waver. At the same time, he was conscious of the last of his strength leaving him. He braced himself for pain, but instead felt himself falling. He opened his eyes, but all he could see was darkness. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. But it turns out that this cavern was a place built to execute magicians. And because of the way this thing was activated, it really seems like there's not a particular... there isn't a... What's the word? The cavern is not discriminating. The cavern does not know who is there. It doesn't seem to be directed like towards people who are guilty. Like you can't have a group of like 5 or 6 people in there and have it target the one person. Because Daniel is just standing there messing around with his globe lights trying to see what it is. And this thing mindlessly lashes out trying to kill him. So I do not understand how this works. If you aren't able to bring, unless it's only attracted to somebody with magic, and you could send Daniel in there, for example, with 2 people who had no magic, and they would be safe, perhaps? Because I'm thinking if you're going to execute people, you need to have guards to ensure that they go where they need to go, because otherwise, of course, this would not be effective. And I'm wondering, because of the way that this is written, and the fact that Tyen has to translate what it said, he says execute magicians. Well, what if it's not execute in the way that we think? What if they're not literally going to die? It's that their magic would be removed forever. And so they're no longer a magician. You're ending a magician. Executing a magician, and it would be like a turn of phrase that would still apply. I'm just very curious about what all of this means and why Acheron was here and what he could have learned. I don't know. It's a really strange situation. And they know so little about what this is. I just don't have a lot of theories on this. So we'll get to, because that's where that scene ends, and then we go back to Sonea. So we'll get to his revelation in a bit. But I wanted to dip back to Sonea getting her message from Tanya. She gets her letter and finds out that her aunt and uncle are going to have another baby and wants to go and visit them. And at first she says it like, I wish I could see them, in this sort of theoretical, like, wouldn't that be nice? And Tanya's like, well, you can go visit them. Like, you're not imprisoned here, right? And Sonea sort of has to stop and be like, she's right. As much as I'm under Acheron's control and under threat of him, he's never said I'm not allowed to leave. And the students, the other ones, in ordinary circumstances are allowed to leave. The only thing that she is concerned about is the fact that she's going to be wearing her novice uniform in an area where people are not exactly amenable to magicians. So the law says that she is supposed to wear the novice uniform at all times. And so she has to figure out a way, because she's not concerned about breaking the law. I like this. She was not too worried about breaking the law, but where was she going to change into the sort of shabby clothing that would disguise her in the slums, even if she managed to find some? So I love that it's like, oh yeah, breaking the rule is no problem. It's just the actual logistics of breaking the rule that I need to really figure out. So she decides that she's going to do this, and doesn't tell Acheron, of course, which it turns out doesn't matter. But she does sort of low-key think that she can keep this from him, that if she gets back in time, he won't even notice that she's gone. And of course, because of the fact that we find out later from Acheron's chat with Laurelin that he's watching her all the time, he knows exactly where she went. And for all we know, he actually followed her into town. I wonder if he did. I don't know. I don't know how far he goes all the time. So she goes, and this I found really, really fascinating. Once in the inner circle, she felt strangely out of place. Looking up at the grand homes that lined the streets, strong memories returned of her first few visits to this part of the city years before to deliver repaired shoes and clothing to servants of the houses. During those visits, the well-dressed men and women of the inner circle had regarded her with suspicion and disdain, and she had been forced to show her token of admission several times. Now those people smiled and bowed politely as she passed them. It felt strange and unreal. The feeling increased as she passed through the gates into the north quarter. The gate guards stopped and saluted, and even stopped a carriage of House Corrin so she could pass without delay. Once in the north quarter, the polite bows and smiles changed to stares. After several hundred paces, Sonea changed her mind about visiting the market. Instead, she stepped up to a house advertising quality clothing and alterations. So this woman that works here, that probably owns this shop, is very concerned about the fact that, like, nothing she has is going to be good enough for somebody of Sonea's class, which is just adorable. And then Sonea's like, listen, honestly, I'm not going to be buying anything, like, off the rack in here. I need something that looks like it's been beaten up. And if your servants are going to, like, be throwing any of their cloaks away, or I would definitely pay for something like that. So, okay, here it is. She saw the seamstress enter the room, her arms laden with clothing. A servant followed her in, looking pale and harassed. Looking over the cloaks, Sonea chose one with a long, neatly repaired rip down one side. The hem had come unstitched from the lining, too. She looked at the serving girl. Is there a garden here? Perhaps a poultry yard? The girl nodded. Take this cloak and rub the hem in some dirt for me, and throw a little dust over it. Looking bemused, the girl disappeared with the cloak. Sonea pressed a gold coin into the seamstress's hand. Then, as the servant returned with the soiled cloak, slipped a silver into the girl's pocket. Who would have thought I'd end up using my pickpocketing skills to give money away rather than steal it, she mused as she left the house. I love that. Like, I guess she figures that the woman who owns the shop would not be pleased at the servant being paid, and I think she's probably right about, like, I think she handled this the smartest way. And I just really do enjoy that, like, because that's what happens when somebody who didn't used to have money gets money. They just remember, at least, you know, for the first few years, they remember what it was like to be on the edge all the time. And they are a lot more compassionate and a lot more aware of, like, trying to help other people and compensate them fairly. It's something that you really see when you're in customer service. People who haven't worked customer service jobs are the biggest assholes because they have no concept of what it's like to work that kind of job and how thankless it is and how shitty most people are. And they don't see customer service workers as actual people because they have never been in that position, and they lack the capacity to be empathetic and compassionate to anybody who isn't immediately personally relatable. So she heads in with her cloak on and goes and visits Jonna and Rendell. It's Rannell. Sorry. Jonna and Rannell. Since she joined the guild, they had been uneasy and awkward. They had witnessed her lose control of her powers over a year before, which I didn't know that. I didn't know that they saw that happen. And Sonea would not have been surprised if they were still afraid of her. But she knew that she would never overcome their fear or awkwardness if she didn't keep visiting them. They were still her only family, and she was not going to let them disappear from her life. So they, like, just basically, you know, have a little bit of family time, visiting the baby that's already over there, the cousin that's asleep. And Jonna has her belly getting bigger. They play with the baby. They have a meal together. They share news. And then they mention the purge. And Sonea admits that, like, I stupidly thought that after what happened last year, they weren't going to do that again. And then says, perhaps when I've graduated. She shook her head. What will I do? Talk them out of it? As if they'd listen to a slum girl. I would love to see her reach a position of power strong enough that she could argue against the purge. That'd be pretty cool. She was still a long way from ever being able to help the people she had once felt she belonged among. The idea of persuading the guild to stop the purge seemed naive and ridiculous now, as did the hope that they'd ever offer healing to the Dwells. Yeah, I feel really bad about that healing thing. Like, it just bears a little bit too much resemblance to the system in the United States, where if you are poor, you don't get health care and you die. The end. You be careful going home, Randall said. You don't want to run into this murderer everyone's talking about. What murderer? Randall's eyebrows rose. I'd have thought you'd have known about it already. Been all over the city. They say the murderer isn't one of the thieves. I've heard the thieves are out for him. Had no luck, though. And they describe the way that he kills, and Sonea, like, kind of realizes what that sounds like, obviously. And they also mention he wears a ring with a big red gem. And that leads to her later running into Lorelin and seeing his red gem ring, and apparently wondering if maybe he's the murderer, which, oh God, what a situation. But yeah, I am really, like, I just fucking vacillate so much on my theories on who the murderer is, if it's even somebody we know, and I keep on being like, I don't think it's Acheron. It very well may be. Maybe Acheron just really is just the bad guy. But there's something so shady about him, and I don't mean shady in in the simple term of like, well, he's obviously not a great person. I mean shady in that he's real cagey about answering any direct questions about anything, that makes me feel that he isn't just the bad guy, that there's something more to him, something else going on. And I have no idea what it could be. So she finally heads back, and she's thinking to herself about like whether or not this is all going to turn out to be Acheron. It suddenly occurred to her that visiting her aunt and uncle was the worst kind of foolishness. She had all but disappeared. Only Tanya knew where she'd gone. If Lorelin and Rothan had heard she was missing, they might decide it was Acheron's doing. Or Acheron might have concluded that she had left the guild and be preparing to silence the others right now. So yeah, she hadn't really thought that through. I think her reaction here is a little extreme, and the idea that Acheron couldn't track her down pretty easily. She just doesn't seem to still quite grasp the scope of his power yet. But yeah, I kind of enjoy the fact that she like goes out and does this thing in secret, thinking like, oh, I'm going to really pull one over on him. And then finally is like, oh no, this might have been the worst possible way to handle this. Correct. Yes. So chapter 33 is when Daniel wakes up after having passed out from the attack of whatever that dome was. And what wound up happening is the dome was evidently trying to kill him and sapped him of his power to the point that when he wakes up, he completely has no magic in him. And knowing that he lacked magic should have made him feel vulnerable and uneasy, but instead he felt freer, as if released from something. So he talks to Tyen about the whole thing. The writing said the door led to a place called the Cavern of Ultimate Punishment, and a little farther I worked out that it was made to execute magicians. I tried to call you to warn you, and then I heard you call me and made the lights. Before I could reach the end of the passage, they went out. I kept going. When I got to the cavern, you were pressed up against something invisible. Then you fell forward, and you didn't move. I could see more of the lightning things on the walls. I ran forward and grabbed your arm, and then pulled you off the platform. The lightning touched it, then everything went dark. I couldn't see, but I kept pulling you along in the passage and back outside. Then I carried you here. You're really heavy, by the way. So I like this, that there's like kind of a little metaphor actually here for Daniel coming to terms with the fact that he's actually gay, because it's sort of like Tyen is out there translating and trying to like decipher something, but he lets Daniel go on and discover this thing by himself. That lets him like, you know, go down the passage alone and figure it out. Daniel almost can't handle it, like comes very close to trying to obliterate himself. And Tyen manages to swoop in and sort of save him. And it turns out that what Daniel has been doing at this point in his life, almost unconsciously by habit now, he had been using his magic to tamp down the feeling of attraction that he had to men. And not having magic, because he's so drained, it brings all of that to the forefront. It makes him realize like that this is something that he really feels, that he kept thinking if he disciplined himself with magic enough, these feelings would go away. But once the magic is completely gone, he feels it just as acutely as he ever did and knows this is not going away. This is me. This is who I am. And that's not something that I can like force into another shape. He frowned, wondering why he had reached for his powers unconsciously. Like, he doesn't even realize he's doing it. Then realization came. He had been about to use his healing powers to take away the uneasiness, or at least the physical reaction that had caused it. As I always do, without realizing it. Memories came rushing back. Memories of being the object of scandal and rumor. He had decided that if how he felt was so unacceptable, that it was better not to feel at all. And perhaps with time he would begin to desire what was right and proper. But nothing had changed. The moment he lost the ability to heal, there it was again. He had failed. Daniel? Looking at Tyen, Daniel felt his heart skip. How could he look at his friend and consider that being like him was a failure? He couldn't. He remembered something that Tyen had said. There is a certainty in me about what is natural and right for me that is as strong as his own certainty about what is natural and right. What was natural and right? Who really knew? The world was never so simple that one person could have all the answers. He had fought this for so long. What would it be like to stop fighting? To accept what he was? So, I just want to say that this is something that, like, I mean, if anybody has any friends who are gay or queer or questioning, this is so real. And the whole thing about trying to not feel anything at all is very much something that people do because they decide, well, I'm not going to be able to fake being straight. So rather than do that, I will just not have any relationships at all. And that is presented by many people who believe that being gay is wrong or a sin as a viable alternative to the gayness, is to just be celibate, to not be in any relationship at all. I remember this very distinctly with a close friend of mine, that he came from a family of Jehovah's Witnesses and he was gay, and his family just said to him, well, you can be gay, but just don't act on it. And that would make it fine. So what Daniel has done, dulling the desire, is extremely common. And like I said, touted as a solution, quote unquote, to being gay. And it's the most depressing thing. Like, the whole idea that especially if you are somebody who is religious, that God gave a person the capacity to love, and then you are telling them to get rid of it because the type of love is unacceptable, is so backward and fucking disgusting and wrong that it makes me infuriated. And of course, what people like that think is that it's not love, that it's simply lust and a perversion. But that's because people like that often lack the kind of capacity necessary to understand. And Daniel's like talking to Tyen about this. He finally like tells him the truth about how he's feeling. It made me empty of any feelings of attraction. I desired neither men nor women. I suppose I was lonely, but it was a dull kind of loneliness. There isn't as much pain in life if you don't let yourself become entangled with others. He paused. But is that really living? Tyann didn't answer. Looking at the scholar, Daniel read a wariness there. You knew, Daniel said slowly, but you couldn't say anything. And he thinks to himself, otherwise I would have reacted with fear and denial. Tyann shrugged. It was more like a guess. If I was right, though, I knew there was a chance you'd never confront it. Now that I know the effort you went to, it's amazing you have it all. Habits are hard to break. So he's looking at Tyann and asks himself if he can really accept who he is, and decides that yes, he can, which we'll see if that's true, because it's one thing to decide that when you are alone with the person that you care about, and it is a very different thing when you are faced with society and all of the expectations from people that you've known your whole life, and the, the possible future of being like exiled and shunned by all of your colleagues and peers. So I hope that he is able to be, if at the very least, if things don't work out there, I hope that he will move to Aline, where apparently that's more acceptable. But we shall see. Okay, so Sonea is heading home, and this is where she goes into the first day meal that she always has with Acheron. The meals that are so delicious, but which she still dreads because she has to hang around him. She looks for a ring with a red stone on Acheron's hands and sees that his hands are bare. Not even a mark to hint that a ring might have been worn regularly. His fingers were long and elegant, yet masculine. As Sonea began to eat, Acheron straightened, and she knew his usual questions were about to start. So, how are your aunt and uncle and their son? Did you have a pleasant afternoon with them yesterday? I didn't even realize, I don't think, that she had been gone, that this was the next day. Not that she was gone overnight, because she came back, but she just didn't realize that he knew she'd gone the previous day. You're not going to die on me, are you? He asked dryly. That would be inconvenient. What does that mean? Inconvenient for what? That makes it really sound like he has a plan for her, and I don't know what that looks like. I don't disapprove of you visiting them, he told her. I do, however, expect you to ask me for permission if you intend to leave the guild grounds at any time. Next time, I'm sure you'll remember to ask me first. So let's go to the moment with Lorelin when he runs into Sonea and she looks at his hand. Turning to watch her, he felt his chest tighten. Each day she moved from one inescapable nightmare to another, from the shadow of Acheron to the torments dealt out by the novices. It was a cruel situation, and an unnecessary one. Clenching his fists, he advanced on the door and stepped through. And so he just confronts Acheron and is just like, why are you letting this happen? And Acheron says it does her good, to which Lorelin is like, are you high? And Acheron says she is getting taught how to be stronger by then. She doesn't want to take warrior classes, and when she does take them, she holds back. But when she is forced to defend herself in this sort of way, it spurs her to expand her power. And the last time that Acheron saw her fight back, because Lorelin says, this is 15 novices against 1. 15? Acheron smiled. The last I saw, it was near 20. Lorelin stopped pacing and stared at the High Lord. You've been watching her? Whenever I can. Though it's not always easy to keep up with them. I would like to know how that last one ended. 18, perhaps 19, and she still managed to free herself. She got away? But that means... Acheron chuckled. I'd advise you to think twice if you were planning to take her on in the arena, Lorelin, though her lack of skill and confidence would ensure you won the fight. Every time they attack her, she stretches herself. She's learning to defend herself in ways neither Balkan nor Yukmo can teach her. I'm not going to stop Regin and his accomplices. They're the best teachers she has. But why do you want her stronger? Lorelin breathed. Aren't you afraid she will turn against you? What will you do when she graduates? Acheron's smile vanished. She is the High Lord's chosen novice. The guild expects her to excel, but she will never grow strong enough to be a threat to me. He looked away, and his expression hardened. As for graduation, I'll decide how to deal with that when the time comes. What in the fuck does that mean? Like, honestly, though, what does that mean? Let's see. At Acheron's instruction, Lorelin had explained to Baron he would not be sending magicians out in a hunt for the rogue, as he had done with Sonea. The previous search had driven Sonea to seek the help of the thieves, and they had kept the guild from finding her for months. Though the thieves were rumored to be hunting for the murderer as well, it was not impossible that they would strike a deal if he came to them for help, so it was better that the guild gave the murderer no reason to hide himself too carefully. The guard must locate him. Then Lorelin would arrange for magical assistance to capture him. Baron had agreed that this was the wisest action. But this would never happen if the murderer was Acheron. Lorelin considered the black-robed man. He wanted to ask Acheron directly if he had anything to do with the murders, but he was afraid of the answer, and even if the answer was no, could he believe such a denial anyway? Well, I mean, yeah, he did. It says, like, he was afraid to even ask, but he did ask one time, and Acheron just completely ignored the question, and, like, you know, they were doing it mentally, and just, basically, Acheron hung up on him. So yeah, it's not like he's going to get an answer. So when Lorelin says that he will of course leave this alone if Acheron tells him to, Acheron is like, well, you didn't do what I asked when it comes to Daniel. And poor Lorelin, like, he doesn't know that Rothan has instructed Daniel to essentially keep on with the work. So Lorelin's a little bit, like, nonplussed. And it says, like, I told him to abandon the work. And Lorelin is like, or Acheron is like, well, then why is he doing it still? Like, apparently he's just decided to ignore your orders. And Lorelin's just, I don't know, dude, but, like, what are you going to do? I haven't decided. If he goes where I fear he may go, he will die, and not by my hand. So I imagine that's what do they call the place of judgment, the cavern of judgment? I think that's what he must be talking about here. It's too late. I shall have to weigh the risks. Risks? Lorelin frowned. What risks? Acheron turned and smiled. You are full of questions tonight. I wonder if there's something in the spring water lately. Everyone seems to have grown so bold. That is all I can tell you for now. If I was free to tell you what I know, I would. For now, you'll just have to trust me. So then we come to the moment when Daniel is with Lorelin, thinking about how they have so much ahead of them that he won't have to think about going back to the guild for a really long time, that they can enjoy at least this time together before he decides what he's going to do. And then Acheron busts in with his mental connection and is like, hey, so you're going to come back now. You're canceling and everything else that you were going to do. And I know that you are continuing your research despite Lorelin's orders. And your duties as ambassador are apparently not overly time-consuming. I want to discuss what you found in person. Return to the guild at once and bring your notes with you. What of the rest of my journey to visit the Dems? You will return to complete your duties afterward. Very well. I will have to report to me when you arrive. So, yeah. I'm wondering if he's going to bring Tyend with him. I assume no. Oh yeah, no, here it is. Cause Tyend asks him, he's like, I'll go with you. And no, Daniel's immediately like, no, you don't want to be dragged into this. What would happen to Tyend if Acheron took exception to Daniel continuing his research? Would the High Lord's disapproval extend to the scholar? Daniel did not care what consequences he might suffer so long as Tyend was not affected. What a sweet little cinnamon roll. I love him so much. So then comes Sonea and Dorian. And it's a sad moment because he does the little flirt thing to gauge where she's at. And after he tells her that he finds her to be really good company, and she sort of winces and looks away and doesn't respond, he realizes that things are like not going in the direction that he thought they were going, that the kiss that they shared is probably the only time that that is going to happen. And it's an interesting moment because they arrived at that little turn of phrase where he's like, well, I think that you're excellent company. They arrive there because he's explaining to her that a formal challenge is probably the way to deal with Regin. And she latches onto that because she really likes the idea of doing something that only involves her and will not cause other people to be harmed or put in the middle of it. And he himself, like Dorian, is like, listen, I understand that's what you want, but that's simply not possible. You need those supporters. And even if you defeat him, he may continue to try and fight you over and over again. And that may be looked upon favorably by people who think that he's just determined. If you have other novices around you who like you and you have defeated him, there's probably not going to be a whole lot that he can do. And she's like, I don't want to fake friendship. I don't want to pretend to be like nice to people, essentially so that I can like lead a gang. And this is when he says, you don't have to be like Regin, just be enjoyable company, which you shouldn't have any difficulty with. I think your company is very enjoyable. She looked away. I should say something to put him off now, she thought, but she could not think of anything. Looking at him again, she saw a wary, disappointed expression on his face and realized she had told him enough by not saying anything. He smiled, but this time there was no twinkle in his eyes. What else have you been up to? So I like the fact that Dorian is taking this hint. He's not stupid. He's not trying to push it. And that they didn't have to have like a conversation about it. Especially like later on, Rothan is thinking to himself that if Sonea did have to explain to Dorian what was going on, it would push Dorian to do something really stupid. So she didn't even have to go down that road. They didn't even have to, she didn't have to lie to him or tell him the truth and get him in trouble. So Lorelin goes in to speak to Rothan and is talking about Dorian. At first, Rothan thinks that he's coming to talk to him about Sonea and that something has gone wrong with her. And it turns out to be indirectly related because, understandably, Lorelin is concerned about how Dorian could get roped into this whole silly, awful, terrible situation. I'm sorry, Rothan. We have enough to worry about. I trust you'll do everything you can. Do you think Sonea will see the danger and turn him away? Yes, of course she would. Rothan felt a pang of sympathy for his son. Poor Dorian. He would have half expected Sonea to lose interest anyway, considering the years of study ahead of her and his long absences, but if Dorian knew the real reason, it would probably drive him to do something foolish. Better that he didn't know. And when Lorelin leaves, there's a moment with Rothan of feeling like really resentful for a second, because he's like, you're supposed to be the one that figures out how to fix this stuff. And that transforms into a feeling of hopelessness. Because, Lorlin's supposed to be the guy that figures out how to fix this stuff, and he can't, which means this is a real bad situation. And this chapter ends with Sonea waking up and somebody in a robe standing over her bed. She assumes that this is Lorelin. She assumes that this is Acheron. We don't see that it's Acheron. It probably is Acheron. I assume that it is. But that's not a guarantee. And what the fuck? He has his hand extended out over her. Is he giving her power or taking power from her? What is that about? I got nothing on that. That was super creepy too. Like, anybody listening, if you have woken up and there's been somebody like either near you or looking at you that you weren't ready for, that shit is so unnerving. I had that happen one time. Owen was watching me sleep and he was looking at me in this really sweet way and was about to like lean over and give me a kiss, even though I was still asleep. And at that very moment, I opened my eyes and I almost hit the ceiling he looked so creepy to me, just sitting there watching me. And, he thinks he's being very sweet. And I'm like, what are you doing, you freak? And I can't imagine if it's not somebody that you love and trust doing that, how fucking, alarming that would be. No, thank you. So yeah, that's the end of that section. And I'm dying to know what the formal, challenge is going to be like. Oh, I can't wait. So yeah, I think that episode is going to be recorded next week because I believe Ashley booked it already. So thank you, Ashley. She is on shit. Ashley is just seriously really making sure that I get through these books, and I appreciate that a great deal. So all right, I'm going to sign off here, guys. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you again to Ashley. Thank you to Martin for coming to the chat. And I will be seeing you next week with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.